John parked his car in front of the small house he'd bought in Blue Harbor, a faraway escape from the hectic life he had left behind. It was a calm, sunny morning, with the gentle sound of waves crashing in the distance and the salty smell in the air. Blue Harbor was the exact opposite of New York, where he'd spent years in hospitals, operating rooms, and endless shifts. He sighed, relieved to finally be there, far from the stifling routine that had drained his last bit of energy. The decision to move had been sudden, but not without reason. John was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. The relentless pace of the big city, the constant pressure to save lives, and the growing feeling that something was missing had made his success as a surgeon feel almost irrelevant. He no longer found the same satisfaction in the achievements that once made him choose this career. His new home, a simple and modest structure, sat on top of a hill, where he could see the ocean stretch out to the horizon. It wasn't luxurious, but it offered the peace he'd been yearning for. As he walked through the interior, he calmly observed every detail. The kitchen was small but functional. The living room had a large window, allowing the morning sunlight to flood the space. Enough, he thought, while unpacking a few boxes. Yet, despite all the tranquility, John still felt a bit out of place. In New York, he was always surrounded by people, colleagues, patients, friends. But here, the streets were quiet, and the pace of life was slower. Still, he believed that, with time, he would find his place. In the first few days, John dedicated himself to exploring Blue Harbor. The town was small and welcoming, with a nostalgic atmosphere. People seemed to know each other, waving kindly as he passed by. There were only a few shops and restaurants, but one quickly became his favorite. A small seaside bistro where the smell of fresh coffee and newly baked bread greeted him every morning. He would sit at a table by the window, with a view of the ocean, letting his mind wander as he sipped his coffee. It was a quiet spot, and he appreciated the simplicity of his morning meals. From there, he watched the town's rhythm. Fishermen returning from their journeys, people coming and going from their daily routines. John began to feel a slight comfort in Blue Harbor's everyday life, though a part of him still searched for something deeper. It was during one of those mornings that he witnessed the scene that would change the course of his life in that town. It was a calm evening, and the bistro was relatively empty, with just a few occupied tables. John, as usual, was lost in thought when he heard a raised voice coming from another table. An elderly woman, with gray hair and a lost look, was the target of mocking by some young waiters. They chuckled quietly while the woman, visibly confused, fumbled through her purse, desperately trying to find something to cover the cost of her meal. "Don't worry, you don't need to pay," one of them said sarcastically, but it was clear her discomfort amused them. John watched the scene for a few seconds, feeling a growing irritation. The woman seemed lost, her expression a mix of confusion and shame. Without hesitation, he quietly called the manager over and asked that her bill be added to his. He didn't want to make a big gesture. He just wanted the humiliation to stop. The manager, though surprised, accepted the request without question. Once the bill was paid, the woman, still disoriented, got up to leave. John watched her slowly walk away down the street, her head down, as if she were carrying an invisible burden. Something about the scene disturbed him deeply, though he couldn't quite understand why. Maybe it was the fact that, even in a small, supposedly welcoming place like Blue Harbor, cruelty could still show itself in small ways. Returning home that night, the image of the old woman lingered in his mind. Who was she? Why was she so alone? These thoughts followed him into the next day when he discovered the news that would shake him even more. When he entered the bistro for his usual morning coffee, the manager immediately recognized him and approached, looking hesitant. "The lady from yesterday. She passed away shortly after leaving here," he said, the words coming with some difficulty. John felt a knot form in his throat. She collapsed in the street. Someone found her, but it was too late. The news hit him with unexpected force. He didn't know her, but something about the situation made him feel as if he had lost something important. Before he could fully process what he'd heard, the manager handed him a small note. "Her daughter asked me to give you this." John carefully took the piece of paper. It was a simple note, but full of gratitude. "Thank you for taking care of my mom yesterday. I'd like to meet you. Mia." John stood still for a moment, staring at the note in his hand, trying to absorb Mia's words. There was something touching in that simple message, something that moved him deeply, even though he didn't quite know why. Maybe it was the idea that such a small gesture, quietly paying for someone's meal, had meant so much to that family. He went back to his table, still holding the note, ordering his usual coffee, but his mind was elsewhere. The waves softly crashed along the shore, and the sun was still rising over the horizon, casting Blue Harbor in golden light, but John barely noticed the scene around him. His head was full of thoughts about that elderly woman, Layla. He'd learned her name from the manager, and the unexpected impact of her passing. Shortly after finishing his coffee, he picked up the phone and dialed the number written on the note. The dial tone echoed a few times before a soft, cautious voice answered. "Hello? Mia? This is John, the guy who paid for your mom's dinner last night." There was a moment of silence on the other end, like Mia was trying to gather her thoughts. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with emotion. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said, her voice a little shaky. "You did something so simple, but my mom, she wasn't well, and that was one of the last moments we had together." John was silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. How could he respond to something so intense? The truth was, he hadn't done it expecting any sort of recognition or gratitude. "I'm sorry for your loss," he finally said, feeling that anything else would fall short. "I'd like to meet you in person," Mia continued, her voice now more composed. "I just want to thank you properly. My mom, well, it's not an easy story." They arranged to meet at the same bistro the next day. When John hung up, he felt oddly nervous. There was something in Mia's voice that hinted at depth and pain, something that intrigued and drew him in. He spent the rest of the day trying to focus on other tasks, unpacking boxes, organizing his new home, but his mind kept drifting back to that phone call. The next day, John arrived at the bistro early, ordering his usual coffee, but he couldn't stop glancing at the door every minute that passed. When Mia finally walked in, he was surprised. She was young, probably in her 30s, with dark hair that fell in loose waves over her shoulders. Her eyes, however, were what stood out the most, big and filled with a sadness that seemed far too deep for someone her age. "Hi," she said, forcing a small smile as she approached John. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," John replied, standing up to greet her. "I'm really sorry about your mom." Mia nodded, sitting in the chair across from him. "She had Alzheimer's," she began, not mincing words. "She was in the final stages of the disease, and in the last few months, well, it felt like I'd already lost her in many ways. She didn't always recognize people, but that night at the restaurant, there was a moment of clarity. She knew who I was. And then, right after that, Mia's voice broke for a moment, and John felt a tightening in his chest. He'd dealt with all kinds of losses as a doctor, but never like this, in such a personal and intimate way. "I'm so sorry," he repeated, this time with more weight in his words. "I didn't know." Mia gave a sad smile, running a hand through her hair as she tried to keep her emotions in check. "I know, but what you did, I just want you to know that it made a big difference for me. My mom was so embarrassed that she couldn't pay. It wasn't her fault, of course, but, well, Alzheimer has this cruel way of stripping people of their dignity." John nodded, listening carefully as she spoke. He could see the exhaustion in Mia's eyes, the weight she carried. "Caring for someone with Alzheimer's must be incredibly difficult," he said, trying to show empathy. "It is," Mia agreed with a sigh. "It's an all-consuming job. You constantly feel helpless. Every day, it's like losing another part of the person you love, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." John understood what she meant. He'd seen it in patients over the years, the families struggling with the gradual loss of a loved one, even while their body was still present. "I didn't know what to do that night," Mia continued, her voice softer now. "I was trying to hold it all together, but you helped my mom keep a little bit of dignity, and that means more to me than you could imagine." John was at a loss for words. He knew he'd done a good thing, but he hadn't expected it to have such a profound impact. The gesture, which for him had just been a small act of kindness, now felt much larger, a meaningful connection between him and Mia. The two sat in silence for a moment, each absorbing the weight of the conversation. But there was something else there, something unspoken, that seemed to hover between them. John felt an unexpected urge to keep getting to know her, to understand more about Mia's life and what she'd been through. "If you ever need anything," he finally said, breaking the silence, "even if it's just to talk, I'm here." Mia looked at him, surprised by the offer. There was something in John's expression that seemed sincere, something that suggested he genuinely cared. "Thank you," she said softly. I might take you up on that. Taking care of my mom was all I did. Now, I'm not really sure what to do next." John nodded. He knew that Mia's life, just like his, was at a crossroads, and somehow, he felt their paths were meant to cross at that moment. In the days following their meeting at the bistro, John couldn't stop thinking about Mia and the intensity of her pain. He had seen many families struggling as they watched a loved one deteriorate, but there was something different about how Mia carried that weight. Maybe it was the deep loneliness reflected in her eyes, or the fact that she seemed to be trying to rebuild her life after not only losing her mother, but also losing the sense of purpose that came with caring for her. John, too, felt a growing emptiness since his decision to leave New York. He had believed that moving to Blue Harbor and escaping the pressure of the big city would bring him the peace he needed, but the quiet and serenity he had longed for now felt, at times, suffocating. Meeting Mia made him see things differently. Maybe what was missing in his life wasn't the absence of chaos but a genuine human connection. A week after their initial meeting at the bistro, John mustered the courage to send Mia a message, suggesting they meet again. He was curious about her mother's story, and in a way, he wanted to offer his support. The response came quickly. "Yes, I'd like that. How about we meet at the bistro tomorrow around 10 a.m.? When Mia arrived the next day, there was something different about her. Though her eyes still held traces of the sadness she carried, there was also a faint glimmer of relief, as if, slowly, she was starting to cope with her loss. They greeted each other with shy smiles, and after ordering coffee, Mia began to share more about her mother. "My mom wasn't always like that," she began, absent-mindedly playing with the strap of her bag. "Before Alzheimer's, she was strong. She was a teacher, and she loved what she did. She was full of life, full of dreams. But everything changed after my dad died." John nodded, encouraging her to continue. "She took his death really hard," Mia explained, her voice low but steady. "My dad died in a car accident when I was a teenager, and that's when I started to see my mom lose herself little by little. At first, it was just sadness. She could still function. She'd go to work and take care of me, but I could see the grief consuming her. And then, years later, the first signs of Alzheimer's started showing up. Little things. She'd forget where she left her keys or repeat the same story at dinner. In the beginning, I didn't even realize it. I thought it was just part of her grieving." John was familiar with the gradual progression of Alzheimer's, but hearing Mia's story put it into an emotional context that no medical case study ever could. "As time went on, the disease sped up," Mia continued. "She started forgetting who I was. That was the hardest part for me. The look on her face when she didn't know who I was. I'll never forget that. She became someone completely different, someone I barely recognized." John stayed silent, letting Mia release the emotions she'd clearly been holding onto for so long. He was more than willing to listen. "You know," Mia said, staring down at her coffee, "caring for her became the only thing that kept me going. It was exhausting, of course, but it also gave me purpose. And now that she's gone, I feel lost. Like a part of me disappeared with her." John understood what she meant. He, too, had felt lost after deciding to leave New York and completely change his life by moving to Blue Harbor. But unlike Mia, he had left the big city by choice, not due to a traumatic loss. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been," he said gently. "You spent so much time taking care of her, dedicating your life to it, and now it must feel like there's no clear direction." Mia nodded. "Exactly. And I don't even know where to start rebuilding. Alzheimer's, it didn't just destroy my mom. It destroyed everything around her. And now I'm trying to pick up the pieces and figure out what comes next." There was a comfortable silence between them. John could feel Mia's pain, but he also sensed the strength within her, even if she couldn't see it yet. "Maybe you don't have to rebuild everything all at once," John suggested. "Maybe it's just about taking small steps forward, one day at a time. You don't have to have all the answers right now." Mia gave him a faint smile. "You're right. I think I've been trying to run before I even know how to walk again. That's normal. You've been through a lot. But from what I can see, you were an amazing daughter. And that counts for a lot." She looked at him, and for a moment, something seemed to shift in her eyes. There was a flicker of recognition there, something John hadn't seen during their first meeting. "Thank you, John," Mia said, her voice softer now. "I haven't known you for long, but talking to you, it helps. You listen in a way that not many people do, and I really appreciate that." John felt warmth spread through his chest. He didn't know why he felt so connected to Mia, but he knew that, somehow, their lives were now intertwined, as unexpected as that was. "I like talking to you too, Mia," he said sincerely. "I know this might sound strange, but I feel like meeting you was important, in a way that I don't fully understand yet." Mia lifted her gaze and met John's eyes, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. There was a connection between them, something that went beyond pain and grief, something that was just beginning to form. As the weeks went by, they started meeting regularly. Their conversations at the bistro became part of both of their routines, a refuge where they could be honest about their vulnerabilities. John talked about his life in New York, about how he'd lost himself in the frantic pace of the city and the pressures of being a surgeon. Mia shared more about her mother's decline, the struggles of balancing her personal life while dedicating herself entirely to caring for Layla. Slowly, what had started as an act of kindness between them grew into something more. John found himself more and more involved in Mia's life, and she, in turn, began to open up to the world around her again. There was still much to overcome, but together, they were finding a way to move forward, one day at a time. Time flew by in Blue Harbor. Weeks turned into months, and autumn arrived, painting the trees around town with warm, golden hues. John and Mia continued meeting regularly, deepening their friendship, and slowly, something more began to bloom between them. It felt as though they were healing together, each conversation revealing new layers of understanding, not just of each other but of their own lives. One chilly October morning, John and Mia decided to take a walk along the beach. The air was crisp, and a light sea breeze brushed their faces, but the scene was incredibly peaceful. The waves gently lapped against the shore, and the rhythmic sound of the water against the sand created the perfect backdrop for the deep talks they often shared. John had noticed that these outdoor moments made Mia feel lighter, more inclined to open up about her worries. "I never really told you the full story about my mom," Mia began, her voice low but steady. John turned toward her, realizing that, while he knew parts of Layla's story, there was something more that Mia was ready to share now. "She didn't have an easy life," Mia continued, staring out at the horizon as they walked. "Before Alzheimer's, before everything, my mom was an incredible woman. She was a teacher and loved to teach. I remember how her eyes would light up when she talked about her students. She was patient, always trying to give more than she received. But behind all that, there was a tragedy that marked her deeply." John furrowed his brow slightly, curious but waiting for Mia to continue at her own pace. "My dad, Sam, was the love of her life," Mia said with a soft, nostalgic smile. "They were inseparable, you know? One of those couples that seemed destined for each other. They met when they were young and built a life together, with plans for the future, until an accident changed everything." She paused, as if carefully choosing how to tell the rest of the story. "My dad died in a car accident when I was 14, Mia finally said. "He was driving home from work on a rainy night, and he never made it back. I remember how my mom's life changed after that. She shut down. She was never the same again. I felt the loss too, of course, but it was like my mom lost more than just her husband. She lost a part of herself." John stayed silent, letting Mia pour out her thoughts. He could feel the weight of her memories, how that loss had shaped Mia's relationship with her mother. "After my dad's death, my mom started losing herself slowly. She tried to keep things going for me, but I could see how much she was suffering, and it was unbearable. Little by little, she started forgetting things. At first, it was small stuff, where she left the keys, what she went to the store for. But as the years passed, the forgetfulness became more serious. And then, when I was in my 20s, she was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's." John knew the progression of the disease well, but hearing Mia describe it, placed within the context of such personal and painful memories, made the impact hit him harder. "I was so young at the time," Mia continued. "I was still trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. But suddenly, I was thrown into the role of caregiver. My life revolved around my mom and her illness. I watched her lose pieces of herself, day by day, until she could barely remember her own name. It was devastating." John turned to look at Mia, seeing the pain in her eyes. "I'm so sorry you went through that, Mia. It must have been incredibly hard to watch your mom slowly fall apart like that." Mia nodded, her eyes fixed on the waves crashing in the distance. "It was. And there were moments when I felt so helpless, like nothing I did could change what was happening. Alzheimer's is a cruel disease, John. It doesn't just destroy the person who has it. It destroys the people around them too." They walked in silence for a few minutes, both of them processing the weight of what Mia had just shared. John felt an even deeper connection to her now, understanding better what she had gone through and how it had shaped the strong yet vulnerable woman she was today. "I think what hurts me the most," Mia said, breaking the silence, "is that even before Alzheimer's took her mind, tragedy had already stolen her spirit. She never really recovered from losing Sam. It was like she was just surviving, not really living." John nodded, understanding exactly what Mia meant. He had seen that in many patients and their families. Sometimes, the tragedy was more devastating than the disease itself. And for Layla, Sam's death had been the beginning of her own fall. "You did everything you could, Mia," John said, trying to comfort her. "I know it's not easy taking care of someone who's slipping away, but you were there for her until the end. That says a lot about who you are." Mia gave him a sad smile. "Thanks, John. I know I did my best, but sometimes I wonder if I could have done more. Maybe, somehow, I could have changed things." John stopped walking and looked directly at her. "Mia, there's nothing more you could have done. You gave everything you had, and that's more than most people are able to do. Alzheimer's is relentless. It's not something you, or anyone, could control." She met John's eyes, and for a moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Mia's pain ran deep, but John knew that, in time, she would start finding ways to heal. As they continued walking, John thought about how suffering shapes people, but also how shared experiences, no matter how painful, can bring about unexpected connections. He and Mia were two people who had faced their own internal battles, and somehow, fate had brought them together in this small seaside town. "Do you want to head back to the bistro?" John asked as they neared the end of the beach. "I think we could both use something warm to drink." Mia smiled, grateful for the suggestion. "Yeah, I think that sounds good. Thanks for listening, John. It really means a lot. You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad I can be here." As they walked back toward the bistro, side by side, John felt that this moment was a turning point. Mia had opened up to him in a way that no one else had, and he knew that their connection, once based on empathy and support, was deepening into something more, something much more profound. Weeks turned into months, and Mia's presence in John's life shifted from something casual to something essential. With each meeting, their bond grew stronger. Conversations that once revolved around the tragedies of their pasts, Mia's loss of her mother, John's need to escape the pressures of New York, began to evolve. They started talking about the future, their hopes, and sometimes even moments of joy. Mia shared funny memories of her mother before Alzheimer's took over, and John found himself laughing alongside her. John was surprised by how much he looked forward to these moments. The emptiness he had felt upon moving to Blue Harbor was gradually being replaced, and the reason was clear. Mia, what had begun as a small act of kindness, had blossomed into a profound emotional connection. There was something undeniably special between them, something neither of them could, or wanted to, ignore. One afternoon, while they were walking through the local market to pick up groceries, John noticed a change in Mia. She smiled more, and the heavy sadness that once lingered around her seemed lighter. Of course, she was still mourning, and grief doesn't simply vanish, but it was clear that she was healing. And without even realizing it, John was changing too. The loneliness that had greeted him when he first arrived in Blue Harbor was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of hope. "You know," John said, breaking the silence as they browsed through fresh fruit, "I never imagined that meeting you would change my life this much." Mia chuckled softly, picking up an apple and placing it in her basket. "I could say the same. I never thought a phone call to thank a stranger for paying my mother's dinner bill would lead to this." She gestured lightly between them, acknowledging the unspoken connection they had built. "This?" John asked, smiling at her, genuinely curious about how Mia defined what they were experiencing. "Yeah, this," Mia repeated, turning to look at him. "This thing between us. I don't know exactly what to call it, but I know it's something good. Something I wasn't expecting and, to be honest, something I didn't think I'd ever have again." There was a brief pause as they stood in the market, surrounded by people who were busy with their own lives. But between John and Mia, it was as though time had slowed. Her vulnerability in those words touched something deep in him, and John realized he wasn't alone in how he felt. "I felt lost too," John admitted as he placed a few oranges in his basket. "When I moved here, I thought all I needed was peace and quiet. I was running from the chaos, from the pressure of my life in New York. But I've realized, maybe what I was looking for was something more. Something meaningful." Mia stopped walking, letting John's words hang in the air. She knew exactly what he meant. There was something about Blue Harbor, something about each other, that had brought them together in an unexpected but undeniable way. "I feel the same," Mia said, a small smile spreading across her lips. "And it's funny because I think, in a way, I found that something in you. In the middle of all the confusion and grief, you came into my life, and things just started making sense again." Mia's words echoed within John in a way he hadn't anticipated. Something inside him, something dormant for so long, began to stir. He knew that, at some point, they would have to talk about what was really happening between them. But at the same time, he didn't want to rush anything. Their relationship had grown slowly, organically, and John liked it that way. He wanted this connection to evolve naturally, without any pressure. As they continued walking through the market, there was now a silent understanding between them. Nothing had been said explicitly, but both knew that what they shared was no longer just a friendship. It was something more. Something that was growing with every smile, every conversation, every tender moment. A few days later, while having breakfast at the bistro, Mia brought up her work, almost casually. "You know, I haven't really told you much about what I do, have I?" "Not really," John replied, intrigued. "I guess we've been focused on other things." Mia smiled and nodded. "I'm a graphic designer. I mostly work from home, which was convenient while I was taking care of my mom. But now that she's gone, I'm trying to figure out how to have a life that's just mine. You know? A life where I'm not always taking care of someone else." John nodded in understanding. "That makes sense. I imagine it's a big adjustment. You've spent so much time looking after her that now you're having to learn how to take care of yourself again." "Exactly. It's like I don't even know where to start," Mia said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "But I'm working on it. Little steps, like you said. And you? How are you feeling about your life here? Now that you've been in Blue Harbor for a while, do you think you made the right choice in moving?" John thought for a moment. "At first, I was sure that running away was the best thing I could do. But now, I see things differently. It wasn't about running away. It was about finding something that made sense. Something that reconnected me with the world. And I think I found it." Mia smiled, and this time, there was something more behind her smile. A quiet understanding, as though she knew exactly who, or what, John was referring to. That moment at the table seemed to seal a mutual understanding between them. Both were on their own paths of rebuilding, each trying to find themselves again. And they had found comfort and inspiration in one another. It wasn't a forced connection, nor was it rushed. It was something that had grown over time, as both of them began to see the future through new eyes. And then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, John reached across the table and took Mia's hand. She looked at him, surprised at first, but soon she smiled and squeezed his hand back. In that simple gesture, there was an unspoken promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As November arrived, so did a new phase in John and Mia's lives. Since that moment when John had taken Mia's hand at the bistro, something had shifted between them. What had once been a close friendship was now a relationship, though both were still finding their balance in this new chapter. They spent more time together, walking along the beach or preparing simple dinners at John's house. Slowly, the emptiness Mia had felt after her mother's death began to fill. However, there was still a part of Mia that carried a heavy burden, an unresolved feeling that something was left unfinished. One evening, as they sat together on John's porch, wrapped in blankets and sipping warm tea to ward off the chill, Mia finally confessed what had been weighing on her. "I've been thinking about my mom a lot lately," Mia began, her eyes focused on the setting sun. "About how everything ended." John looked at her with concern, sensing that this was a conversation Mia hadn't fully had with herself yet. He gently squeezed her hand, encouraging her to go on. "I did everything I could for her, but sometimes I wonder if it was enough." Mia's voice trembled slightly. "There were so many moments when I felt helpless. Taking care of someone with Alzheimer's is like watching someone disappear slowly, knowing there's nothing you can do to stop it. And now that she's gone, I keep wondering if I could have done more." John knew that these feelings of guilt were common among those who cared for loved ones with long-term illnesses. In his years as a surgeon, he had seen many families struggle with the same doubts, the same painful what-ifs. Alzheimer's, in particular, left deep scars on those around the patient, and Mia, who had dedicated so many years of her life to caring for her mother, was caught in the emotional turmoil of wondering whether she had done enough. "I understand why you feel that way," John said after a moment of silence. "But Mia, you did everything that anyone could do. You were there for her. You loved her. That's more than many people can give. Your mom's illness was something beyond your control." Mia took a deep breath, as though she was trying to absorb the comfort in John's words. But there was still something inside her that resisted letting go of the guilt. "I know, logically, that I couldn't have cured her. But emotionally, it still feels like I failed her." John could feel Mia's pain and wanted so badly to ease it. Then, an idea struck him. "I have a friend, Richard, who's a neurologist. He works with patients who have Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases. Maybe he could help you understand what happened to your mom and maybe, in a way, give you some peace." Mia looked at John, surprised. "Do you think that would help?" "I'm not sure if learning more about her illness would make me feel better or worse. I think it's worth a try," John said. "You spent so much time caring for her, but you never really had the chance to fully understand what was happening, medically speaking. Maybe talking to Richard would help you see things in a different light. And if it doesn't, at least you'll know you tried. After a brief pause, Mia nodded. All right, if you think it could help, I'm willing to try. A few days later, John arranged a meeting with Richard. He had worked with Richard during his residency, and they had kept in touch over the years. Richard was not only an excellent doctor, but also a compassionate and understanding person. John trusted him to approach the sensitive subject of Layla's illness with care. Mia was nervous on the day of the appointment, but John reassured her. Richard's a great guy. He'll listen to you, and I think you'll feel better after this conversation. They met Richard at his office in a nearby town. He welcomed them with a warm smile and a firm handshake, putting Mia at ease immediately. After some initial small talk, they sat down to discuss what had brought Mia to him. So, Mia, Richard began, his voice calm and patient, John's told me a little about your mother. I know that caring for someone with Alzheimer's is incredibly challenging. Would you like to tell me more about what you went through and what's troubling you now? Mia took a deep breath and began to share her story, from the death of her father, to the early signs of Alzheimer's in her mother, to the way the disease slowly took over. Richard listened intently, asking only a few questions, making it clear that he understood the gravity of the situation. I think the hardest part, Mia said, her voice thick with emotion, was watching my mom disappear. The woman I knew was gone long before her physical death, and I still can't shake the feeling that I failed her somehow. Richard nodded, his expression empathetic. That's a completely normal feeling. Alzheimer's is a relentless disease, and even the best care can't change its course. But it sounds to me like you did an amazing job caring for her. That doesn't take away the pain, but maybe it helps you see that within the realm of what was possible, you did everything. Mia nodded, fighting back tears. I know, but it's so hard to let go of the guilt. I understand, Richard said gently. But one thing that might help is understanding that the guilt you feel isn't based in reality. Alzheimer's takes away a person's mind in ways that are difficult to comprehend, even for doctors. Even if you had done everything perfectly, and from what I can tell, you did, her disease would have taken its course. It wasn't something you could control or prevent. John sat quietly beside Mia, watching her wrestle with her emotions. He could see the battle going on inside her, as she tried to take in Richard's words while grappling with her own feelings. That makes sense, Mia said after a long pause. Maybe I've been too hard on myself, but I think it's going to take some time for me to really accept that. Absolutely, Richard said, offering her a kind smile. Healing takes time, and it should. But I believe that as you begin to understand more about what happened to your mother and the impact the disease had, you'll gradually start to let go of the guilt. After the appointment, Mia seemed lighter, though she was still processing everything they had discussed. On the drive back to Blue Harbor, she turned to John. I really needed that, she said, reaching for his hand. I think, for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to forgive myself. John smiled, relieved to see Mia taking this step. You're amazing, Mia, and I'm here for you, every step of the way. Over time, Mia slowly began to accept that she had done everything she could for her mother. The guilt that had once consumed her started to fade, and in its place, something else began to grow. Hope. And as hope took root, so did the love between Mia and John, blossoming into something real, something strong. Winter was approaching fast in Blue Harbor, bringing with it icy winds and shorter days. The sea, once calm, now seemed more restless, with tall waves and a sky often cloaked in gray clouds. But despite the cold, the warmth between John and Mia only grew stronger. They had been together for several months now, and though they hadn't rushed anything, John knew in his heart that Mia was the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. The idea of proposing to Mia had started to form slowly in John's mind. He often found himself thinking about the future, picturing a life with her, filled with quiet moments by the sea, shared laughs, and maybe, in the future, children running along the shoreline. It was a thought that made him smile whenever it crossed his mind. One night, as they sat on the porch of John's house, wrapped in blankets and sipping tea, John knew the time had come to have a serious conversation about their future. He watched Mia for a moment, admiring the way the moonlight softened her features and the gentle way her hair moved in the breeze. The time they'd spent together had healed many of the broken parts inside him, just as he knew that their love had helped Mia rebuild after everything she had been through. Mia, John began, his voice soft but steady, there's something I've been thinking about for a while now. She turned toward him, her eyes curious. What is it? John took a deep breath, feeling the weight and excitement of the moment. I know we've both gone through a lot since we met. We've helped each other heal, and we found something really special together. The more time I spend with you, the more I realize that I don't want this to end. Mia furrowed her brow for a moment, as though she was trying to understand what he was saying. Then her eyes widened in surprise as the realization dawned on her. I love you, Mia, John continued, his voice filled with emotion, and I can't imagine my life without you. Everything we've been through, everything we've overcome, it's made me realize that I want you by my side, always. Mia smiled, but her eyes began to shimmer with tears. John, he pulled a small box from his coat pocket and opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring, set with a sapphire that shimmered like the ocean. It wasn't a traditional engagement ring, but John had chosen it for a reason. The deep blue of the sapphire reminded him of the calm he had found in Blue Harbor and in Mia. He wanted that calm and that love to be a symbol of their future together. Will you marry me? John asked, his voice full of hope and sincerity. For a moment, Mia was silent, her eyes moving between John's face and the ring. Then, slowly, a smile broke across her face, and she nodded, her tears spilling over. Yes, she whispered, her voice full of emotion. Yes, John, I'll marry you. John slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a tight embrace. They sat there in the cold night air, wrapped in each other's warmth, the rest of the world fading away as they held on to the promise they had just made. I can't believe this, Mia said, her voice trembling with happiness as she looked at the ring. It feels like a dream. It's not a dream, John said with a chuckle. It's real, and it's just the beginning. The months following their engagement passed quickly as John and Mia planned their wedding. They wanted something simple and intimate, something that reflected who they were as a couple. They chose to have the ceremony on the beach near John's house, with the sound of the waves crashing in the background. It would be a small gathering with only their closest friends and family, ensuring that the day would be filled with meaning. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Blue Harbor, and soon the whole town was congratulating them. It was a close-knit community, and everyone had seen the way John and Mia's relationship had grown over the past year. People were genuinely happy for them, knowing how much they had both overcome to find happiness. On the day of the wedding, the sky was clear, with only a few wisps of clouds dotting the horizon. The breeze was light, carrying the salty scent of the ocean, and the sound of the waves provided a peaceful soundtrack for the occasion. Mia looked stunning in a simple white dress that flowed with the wind, and John waited for her at the makeshift altar, his heart pounding with anticipation. As Mia walked toward him, their eyes met, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. It was as if the entire world had fallen away, and all that remained was the love they shared. The ceremony was short, but filled with emotion. They exchanged vows that were simple but heartfelt, promising to love and support each other, no matter what the future held. The words flowed naturally because they were true. There was nothing complicated or forced about their love. It had grown slowly, deeply, and was built to last. After the ceremony, the guests gathered for a small reception on the beach, with laughter and conversation filling the air. John and Mia sat together, watching the sunset as they held hands, soaking in the moment. I think we've finally found what we were looking for, Mia said, a serene smile on her face as she leaned into John. I think so too, John replied, squeezing her hand. And I can't wait to see what comes next. As the days grew colder and the sky turned from blue to gray, John and Mia settled into married life. The winter in Blue Harbor was quiet, but inside their home, everything was warm and full of life. They cooked together, laughed together, and spent long nights talking about their future. One day, a new surprise came into their lives. Mia found out she was pregnant. The news came with a mix of emotions, excitement, joy, and even a little fear. But above all, there was love. The idea of bringing a child into their world felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. As Mia's belly grew, so did their anticipation for the arrival of their child, whom they decided to name Jack. The name felt right, a strong, simple name that symbolized the new life they were about to begin. Months later, as spring approached and the flowers bloomed, Mia went into labor. The experience was overwhelming, but when Jack was finally born, the world seemed to stop for a moment. His soft cries filled the room, and John and Mia were flooded with a sense of completeness they had never felt before. He's perfect, John whispered, gazing at their newborn son. Absolutely perfect. Mia, exhausted but glowing with happiness, cradled Jack in her arms. Welcome to the world, Jack, she said softly. You're so loved already. In that moment, with their new baby in their arms, John and Mia knew that they had found their home, in each other, in their new family, and in Blue Harbor. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but now, standing at the beginning of this new chapter, they were ready for whatever life had in store for them next. Together, with Jack's birth, everything changed for John and Mia. Their nights became shorter, filled with baby cries, diaper changes, and late-night feedings. But amid the sleeplessness, there was a profound sense of joy that permeated every moment. Jack brought a new kind of happiness into their lives, a happiness that neither of them had ever known before. It was as if the love they had for each other had now expanded to make room for this tiny new person who, in turn, filled their days with wonder. John, who had spent most of his adult life immersed in his work as a surgeon, now found himself captivated by the smallest things. He marveled at how Jack's tiny fingers curled around his, how his soft breathing calmed him, and how his first coos made both him and Mia laugh with delight. Being a father brought out a new side of John, one that he hadn't known existed. He embraced fatherhood with open arms, learning how to change diapers, how to soothe Jack when he cried, and how to help Mia through the ups and downs of being new parents. For Mia, Jack's arrival was transformative in ways she hadn't expected. Caring for her son gave her a new sense of purpose and a deep healing that she hadn't fully realized she needed. The grief over her mother's passing still lingered, but as she held Jack, she began to reconcile her past with her present. Her mother had loved her deeply, and now, she was continuing that legacy by loving her own son just as fiercely. Every time she looked at Jack, she saw hope, a fresh start after so much loss. The days in Blue Harbor passed slowly, with the rhythm of the ocean setting the pace for their new life. John and Mia took turns caring for Jack, falling into a comfortable routine. Mia had taken time off from her freelance design work to focus on their newborn, while John found a balance between working at the local clinic and being home as much as he could. They spent afternoons walking along the beach with Jack bundled in blankets, the salty sea air filling their lungs as they watched the waves crash against the shore. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch with Jack napping beside them, Mia turned to John with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how much things have changed?" she asked softly, her eyes gazing out at the ocean. John nodded, smiling. "All the time. It's hard to believe we've gone from being two strangers in this town to having a family together." Mia chuckled, her hand resting on Jack's tiny leg. "It feels like a lifetime ago that I was struggling to figure out my next steps after my mom passed. And now, here we are." John's smile softened as he looked at her. "You've come a long way, Mia. We both have." Mia nodded, feeling the weight of his words. They had weathered so much together: grief, change, uncertainty, and yet, sitting there with Jack between them, it all felt like it had been worth it. Every challenge they had faced had brought them closer, shaping them into the couple and the parents they had become. "Do you think we're doing okay?" Mia asked after a moment, her voice full of the quiet vulnerability that came with being a new parent. "Do you think we're good parents?" John reached out, taking her hand in his. "I think Jack is lucky to have you as his mom. You're doing an amazing job, Mia, and we're learning as we go. No one has all the answers, but the love we have for him, that's what matters most." Mia smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, John. I don't know what I'd do without you." John leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And I don't know what I'd do without you." As the months passed, Jack grew quickly, reaching milestones that brought John and Mia endless joy. His first smile came on a warm spring morning, lighting up his tiny face as he lay in his crib. Then came his first laugh, which was so unexpected that it made both John and Mia laugh until their sides hurt. Each new sound, each new movement, filled their home with a sense of wonder and pride. But as Jack grew, so did the realization that Mia hadn't fully let go of her past. Layla, her mother, had been such a significant part of her life, and even though Mia was happy with John and their new family, there were moments when the memories of her mother weighed heavily on her heart. One evening, after putting Jack to bed, Mia sat on the porch with John, watching the sun sink below the horizon. She had been quiet all day, and John sensed that something was on her mind. "Mia," he said gently, "what's going on? You've been a little distant today." Mia sighed, her eyes never leaving the sunset. "I've been thinking about my mom a lot lately, about how much I miss her. I love Jack so much, and I'm so grateful for this life we've built, but there's still this part of me that feels unfinished." John waited, sensing that there was more she wanted to say. "I never really got to say goodbye," Mia continued, her voice thick with emotion. "When she passed, everything happened so fast, and I was so consumed with guilt over whether I'd done enough. I never gave myself the chance to properly mourn her. John reached out, placing a hand on Mia's shoulder. You've been carrying that weight for a long time, haven't you? Mia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I thought that by moving forward, by focusing on Jack and our life here, I could somehow move past it. But it's still there, John. I feel like I need closure. John took a deep breath, squeezing her hand. Then maybe it's time for that. Maybe it's time to visit her grave and finally say goodbye. Mia looked at him, her eyes full of uncertainty. Do you really think that would help? John nodded. I do. You've been through so much, Mia, but you deserve to find peace. The next morning, they packed up the car and made the drive to the cemetery where Layla was buried. It was a quiet place, with large, towering trees that provided shade over the rows of headstones. Mia held Jack in her arms as they walked through the cemetery, with John at her side for support. When they reached Layla's grave, Mia knelt down, tears already streaming down her face. Hi, Mom, Mia whispered, her voice trembling. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I wish you could have met Jack. You would have loved him. Mia paused, taking a deep breath as she wiped her tears. I want you to know that I'm okay now. I'm happy. I found love again, and I have this beautiful family. But I also want you to know that I forgive you for everything. I know you did your best, and I'm finally ready to let go. John stood back, holding Jack in his arms as he gave Mia the space she needed. He watched as she let her tears fall, releasing the weight she had carried for so long. After a few minutes, Mia rose to her feet, her shoulders visibly lighter. She turned to John, her eyes red but peaceful. Let's go home, she said softly. The drive back to Blue Harbor was quiet, but full of a sense of release. Mia's heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had finally made peace with her past, and now, she could fully embrace the life she had with John and Jack. As they pulled up to their house, Mia looked at John and smiled. I think I've finally found my peace, she said softly. John smiled back, his heart full. And now we can focus on building our future together. With Jack in their arms, they walked into the house, ready to start the next chapter of their lives. The journey had been long and full of challenges, but they had found their way, together. And as the sun set over Blue Harbor, John, Mia, and Jack stood at the beginning of a new chapter, ready for whatever came next. Together, they had found love, healing, and a future full of hope. Months passed since Mia's emotional farewell to her mother, and life in Blue Harbor took on a peaceful, steady rhythm. John and Mia settled into the routines of parenthood, finding joy in the small, everyday moments with Jack. Their house, once quiet and solitary, was now filled with the sounds of laughter, baby giggles, and conversations about their future. One crisp morning, as the autumn leaves began to fall, John was preparing breakfast while Mia played with Jack on the living room floor. The cozy warmth of the house contrasted with the chill outside, and the atmosphere was one of pure contentment. Jack starting to crawl, Mia called from the living room, her voice filled with excitement. John walked over, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He watched as Jack moved awkwardly, trying to get his little hands and knees to cooperate. A huge smile spread across John's face. Look at him go. He'll be running around before we know it. Mia laughed, her eyes sparkling as she watched Jack. I can't believe how fast he's growing. John sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they both watched their son. I know. It's like time is speeding up. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, simply enjoying the warmth of their home and the joy that Jack brought into their lives. Later that evening, after Jack had fallen asleep, John and Mia sat outside on the porch, wrapped in blankets as they watched the stars. The peaceful sound of the ocean in the background had become their nightly lullaby, and the quiet moments together were when they felt most connected. I've been thinking about something, John said, breaking the comfortable silence. Mia turned to look at him, curious. What is it? John smiled softly, his gaze focused on the horizon. I've been thinking about our future, about what comes next for us. Mia's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Well, John began, taking a deep breath. I love what we've built here in Blue Harbor, but I've also been thinking about how we could continue to grow as a family. Maybe we could start planning for a new adventure. Mia's brow furrowed in confusion. An adventure? John nodded. I've always loved this town, and it's been the perfect place for us to heal and find each other. But I was thinking, what if we start looking for a bigger home? Somewhere we can watch Jack grow up, with more space for him to run around and maybe more kids in the future. Mia's heart swelled at the thought of expanding their family and creating an even fuller life together. You mean moving? Not necessarily leaving Blue Harbor, John clarified, but maybe finding a home with a little more space. A place we can call our own for the long term. We've already built something so beautiful here. Why not grow it? Mia smiled, her chest full of warmth and love for the man beside her. I love that idea, John. I want that too. John grinned, pulling her closer. Then let's do it. Let's start building the next chapter. In the following months, John and Mia began searching for their dream home. They visited properties in and around Blue Harbor, looking for a place that felt like the right fit for their growing family. Jack had started walking, and they knew it wouldn't be long before he would need more space to explore. After weeks of searching, they found it. A beautiful house with a large garden and a view of the ocean. The house was full of character, with a wraparound porch, tall windows that let in natural light, and enough room for Jack to run and play freely. But what sold them on the house was the feeling of home it gave them, the sense that this was where they were meant to continue their journey. Standing in the empty living room of the new house, Mia looked around, imagining their future here. This is it, isn't it? She said, her voice filled with awe. John wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Yeah, it is. I can picture us here, raising Jack, making new memories, and building the life we've always dreamed of. Mia turned to face him, her eyes full of love. I'm so grateful for you, John, for everything we've been through and everything that's brought us to this moment. John kissed her softly. I feel the same way. This is just the beginning. As they moved into their new home, life continued to unfold in beautiful, unexpected ways. John's work at the clinic thrived, and he found a renewed passion for medicine now that his personal life felt so complete. Mia, too, slowly returned to her freelance design work, finding a balance between being a mother and pursuing her creative passions. Their days were filled with laughter, new milestones for Jack, and the simple joys of family life. The love between them deepened with every shared experience, every challenge they faced together, and every night they spent under the stars, dreaming about their future. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home, watching Jack play in the garden, Mia rested her head on John's shoulder. You know, she said softly, I used to think that life was something that just happened to you, that it was something you had to get through. John looked down at her, his brow furrowing slightly. And now? Mia smiled up at him, her eyes shining with happiness. Now I realize that life is something you build, together. That the people you love are what make it beautiful, no matter what happens. John kissed her forehead, his heart full. You're right. We've built something incredible. And as the sun set over their new home, casting a golden light over the garden where their son played, they knew that their love, their family, and the life they had created together were stronger than anything they could have ever imagined. Years passed, and John and Mia continued to grow their family, welcoming a daughter, Emma, into their lives. Their home in Blue Harbor became the center of their world, a place filled with love, laughter, and the memories they created as they watched their children grow. Jack and Emma grew up with the sound of the ocean in their ears and the warmth of their parents' love surrounding them. Their lives were simple but full of meaning, rooted in the values John and Mia had built together: love, resilience, and the importance of family. Mia never forgot her mother, Layla, and often found herself telling Jack and Emma stories about her. She had found peace in knowing that her mother's legacy lived on through her own motherhood. John, too, found solace in knowing that he had finally built the life he had always longed for, a life filled with love, purpose, and connection. And as the years rolled on, John and Mia sat together on their porch, watching their children play, knowing that they had built a life well lived, a life full of love, healing, and hope. I hope you enjoyed this emotional story. If it touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our future stories. Share it with your friends and leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your opinions and suggestions, so we can continue bringing you stories that move and inspire.